Wait, is that an RV at the bottom of the lake? 9 years ago, his best friend vanished with his whole family. Now, he sees their RV on a sonar screen. When divers look inside, they find bodies and a note on his porch that night. He deserved what he got. Would you keep digging? Comment where you're watching from and enjoy the story. Alan Beck stared at the sonar image on his boat's fish finder, a cold realization spreading through his body despite the warm summer sun beating down on Lake Clearwater. The unmistakable rectangular shape resting at the bottom of the murky waters was no sunken tree or rock formation. It was a vehicle, large and boxy, and it had been there for quite some time, based on the sediment buildup the sonar detected. A recreational vehicle, to be precise. The same type of RV that his best friend Michael Carwell had been driving when he, his wife Norma, and their 2 children Donna and Jake vanished 9 years ago. You see something, Alan? His fishing buddy Carl asked, peering over his shoulder at the display. Looks like we found ourselves a wreck. Might be good fishing around it. Alan's mouth went dry. He couldn't form the words to explain what he was looking at, what he feared he was looking at. The familiar dimensions of a Winnebago Outlook, identical to the one Michael had proudly purchased for their family's first major road trip. The trip they never returned from. We need to call the police, Alan finally managed, his voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of waves against the boat hull. 9 years earlier, the Carwell family had set out from their home in Pineville, a small lakeside town nestled in the Rocky Mountains. Michael had meticulously planned their 2-week adventure. They would visit 5 national parks, camp under the stars, and make memories that would last a lifetime. This is going to be a trip the kids will never forget, Michael had told Alan, his eyes bright with excitement as they shared beers on Alan's back porch the night before their departure. 3 days into their journey, the family stopped responding to calls and texts. At first, everyone assumed they were in areas with poor cell service, but when a week passed with no word, and then 2, alarm bells started ringing. Credit cards unused, cell phones inactive. The last confirmed sighting had been at a gas station just 30 miles outside of Pineville. Search parties combed the roads they were supposed to have taken. Park rangers checked campsites. Police investigated possible accident sites along their route. Nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. It doesn't make sense, Cynthia, Alan's wife, had said during those early days of the search. Michael was the most careful driver I've ever known. Norma always kept in touch. Those kids. Her voice had broken then, unable to continue. Now, as Alan stared at the sonar image, a sickening weight settled in his stomach. The lake was only 4 miles from the gas station where the Carwells were last seen, in the opposite direction from their planned route. Why would they have come here? It made no sense. Unless... Alan couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. Alan? Carl's voice pulled him back to the present. You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I might have, Alan replied, already reaching for his phone. His hands trembled as he dialed 911, the numbers blurring through unshed tears. Within hours, the serene lake transformed into a hub of frantic activity. Police boats, divers, and emergency vehicles surrounded the spot Alan had marked. Yellow tape cordoned off a section of the shoreline as curious onlookers gathered, whispering among themselves. The local news crew had arrived, their van sporting a satellite dish that glinted in the afternoon sun. Sheriff Steeney, a man whose face had aged considerably during the original investigation, stood beside Alan on the dock, watching as divers prepared to descend. You understand this might not be connected to the Carwells, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Could be any number of abandoned vehicles. People dump all sorts of things in lakes. Alan nodded, but they both knew the coincidence was too strong to ignore. The size matched. The location made sense in a terrible way. If someone had wanted to hide an RV, the deepest part of Lake Clearwater would be an effective choice. I just need to know, Alan said quietly. For my own peace of mind. For Cynthia's. We never really got closure. The sheriff placed a weathered hand on Alan's shoulder. I understand. but prepare yourself for what we might find. As the afternoon wore on, the dive team methodically worked the site. Their underwater lights pierced the green darkness, cameras recording everything for evidence. Alan watched from the police boat, his heart in his throat. One of the divers surfaced, pulling off his mask as he approached the boat. "Sheriff," he called, his voice somber. "We've confirmed it's an RV, Winnebago Outlook, just like the report said." Alan felt his knees weaken. "License plate?" the sheriff asked, his notepad already in hand. "Too much algae and sediment to read yet." "We're clearing it now." The diver hesitated, glancing briefly at Alan before continuing. "Sir, there's something else. We detected what appear to be human remains inside the vehicle." The world seemed to tilt beneath Alan's feet. He gripped the boat's railing to steady himself as the sheriff's voice grew distant, drowned out by the rushing in his ears. After 9 years of questions, of hopeful theories about new identities and fresh starts in distant places, the awful truth was emerging from the depths of Lake Clearwater. But nothing could have prepared Alan for what the divers discovered next. As they carefully cleared the driver's side window, one of them suddenly jerked back, air bubbles erupting around his mask in what could only be described as shock. The diver surfaced again, faster this time, ripping off his mask with urgency. "Sheriff," he gasped, water streaming down his face. "There's something wrong with this scene. The steering wheel. It's been tied down. And there's a concrete block on the accelerator pedal." Alan's blood ran cold as the implications sank in. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sent the Carwell family's RV into Lake Clearwater, with them inside. But who? And why? The Carwells had been the perfect family. Michael and Norma, high school sweethearts who'd built a beautiful life together. Donna, their precocious 12-year-old daughter who dreamed of becoming a marine biologist. And Jake, the quiet 8-year-old boy who collected rocks and could recite dinosaur facts for hours. As the police boat headed back to shore, Alan noticed a figure standing apart from the gathered crowd. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat, watching intently. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't place her. When she saw him looking, she turned abruptly and walked away, disappearing among the trees that lined the shore. "Who was that?" Alan murmured to himself, but the sheriff was already on his radio, requesting additional resources for what had just escalated from a recovery to a homicide investigation. That night, as Alan finally returned home, he found a small package on his front porch. No address, no postmark, simply his name written in neat block letters. Inside was a faded photograph of the Carwell family standing proudly in front of their new RV. But something had been added. A red X drawn across Michael's face, and on the back, 5 chilling words written in the same neat handwriting. He deserved what he got. Alan's hands trembled as he placed the photograph on Sheriff Steeney's desk the next morning. The red X across Michael's face seemed to pulse with malice under the fluorescent lights of the police station. "I found it on my porch last night," Alan explained, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "No envelope, no fingerprints. I was careful not to touch it much." Sheriff Steeney slipped on a pair of latex gloves and carefully turned the photo over, reading the message on the back. His weathered face remained impassive, but Alan noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. "This changes things," Steeney said finally. "Someone's been watching. They knew we found the RV, and they wanted you to know they were involved." He leaned back in his chair. "Can you think of anyone who might have held a grudge against Michael? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him or his family?" Alan shook his head. "Michael was the most genuine person I knew. Everyone liked him." But even as he spoke, a memory surfaced, something he hadn't thought about in years. Except, maybe. There was an incident at work, about a month before they left. Michael mentioned someone had been let go because of his report. He was a safety inspector at the construction company. The sheriff made a note. "We'll look into it. In the meantime, I want you to stay alert. Whoever left this might try to contact you again." After leaving the station, Alan drove aimlessly, reluctant to return home to Cynthia's tearful questions. Their own children, now in college, had been devastated by the news. The Carwell kids had been like cousins to them. Almost without conscious decision, Alan found himself driving to the Carwell house. It had sold years ago, after Norma's parents finally accepted that their daughter and her family weren't coming back. The new owners had painted it a cheerful yellow, planted different flowers, replaced the basketball hoop with a bird feeder. Life had moved on. Except it hadn't, not really. It had been frozen at the bottom of a lake all this time. As Alan sat in his car, staring at the house, a silver sedan pulled up behind him. In his rearview mirror, he saw a woman emerge. The same woman he'd noticed at the lake the day before, still wearing a wide-brimmed hat that partially obscured her face. This time, however, she approached his car directly and tapped on the window. Cautiously, Alan rolled it down. "Can I help you?" "You're Alan Beck," she said. It wasn't a question. "You found them." "Who are you?" Alan demanded, suddenly wary. The woman glanced up and down the quiet street before removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. "My name is Pamela Turner. I was Norma's college roommate. We need to talk, but not here." 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth at a diner on the outskirts of town. Pamela kept her hat on, her fingers nervously shredding a paper napkin. "I know who left that photograph on your porch," she said without preamble. Alan nearly choked on his coffee. "How do you—" "Because I've received similar messages over the years," she interrupted. "Warnings, reminders to stay quiet." She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her gallery, and showed him a photo similar to his, the Carwell family, but with Norma X'd out. The message on the back read, "Remember your promise." "What promise?" Alan asked, struggling to make sense of it all. "Pamela, what's going on?" She took a deep breath. 2 weeks before they disappeared, Norma called me in the middle of the night. She was terrified, whispering so Michael wouldn't hear. She said she'd found something. Documents, recordings, evidence that Michael's company was cutting corners on safety protocols for a major government contract. People had died because of it. Alan shook his head in disbelief. That's impossible. Michael was obsessed with safety. He would never— "That's just it," Pamela said, leaning forward. "He wasn't involved, but his boss was, along with some high-level executives. Norma believed they were framing Michael as the fall guy. She had proof. She mailed me a package with copies of everything, told me to keep it somewhere safe in case anything happened to them." "And you never came forward?" Alan felt anger rising in his chest. "Their children, Pamela. Donna and Jake were in that RV too." Tears spilled down Pamela's cheeks. "I tried. A week after they disappeared, I went to the FBI. The next day, my apartment was broken into. Nothing taken except Norma's package. Then came the first photo and a phone call warning me that what happened to the Carwells could happen to my family too." She wiped her eyes. "I was a coward. I convinced myself they might still be alive somewhere in witness protection. It was easier than facing the truth." Alan sat back, trying to process everything. "But why come forward now?" "Because of what you found in the lake," she whispered. "It's proof they were murdered, and because of this." She pulled a small USB drive from her pocket and slid it across the table. "I didn't send them all the copies. I kept one hidden at my parents' house in another state. Last night, after seeing the news about the RV, I drove there and got it." Alan stared at the tiny device. "What's on it?" "Everything Norma collected. Names, dates, falsified reports. The people responsible are still out there, Alan. Some of them are in powerful positions now." Before Alan could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Staney. "Forensics confirmed. 4 bodies in the RV. DNA testing underway, but preliminary examination indicates they match the Carwell family's descriptions. Need you to come in." Alan showed the message to Pamela, whose face paled further. "I shouldn't have come," she said suddenly, gathering her things. "It's not safe for either of us to be seen together." "Wait!" Alan grabbed her wrist. "We need to take this to the authorities together." Pamela jerked away, her eyes wild with fear. You don't understand. These people have connections everywhere. How do you think they knew about the RV being found so quickly? How did they know to leave that photo on your porch last night? She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. Sheriff Steeney was Michael's boss's brother-in-law. Alan felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Sheriff Steeney, who had led the original investigation, who had eventually declared it a cold case, who now held the evidence from the lake. Take the drive, Pamela urged, already backing toward the door. Look at it somewhere private, then decide who you can trust. She pulled her hat lower and slipped out of the diner. Alan sat frozen, the USB drive heavy in his palm. Through the window, he watched Pamela hurry to her car. As she reached for the door handle, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up beside her. A man in a dark suit emerged, showing her something that looked like a badge. Even from a distance, Alan could see the color drain from Pamela's face as she was escorted into the vehicle. The SUV pulled away smoothly, leaving no trace of Pamela Turner behind, except for the evidence now burning a hole in Alan's pocket. Alan's heart hammered against his ribs as he drove aimlessly through Pineville's back roads, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket. Pamela's words echoed in his mind. Sheriff Steeney was Michael's boss's brother-in-law. Could it be true? The same man who had conducted the original investigation, who had comforted the families, who was now heading the recovery operation at the lake. After 15 minutes of driving with no destination, Alan pulled into the parking lot of the town library. Public place, security cameras, computers that weren't connected to his home network. Safer. The elderly librarian nodded as he entered, barely looking up from her book. Alan found a computer in the corner, partially obscured by a bookshelf. His hands shook as he inserted the USB drive. The files were meticulously organized, each folder labeled with dates. Norma had been thorough, just as she had been in her work as an accountant. Alan clicked on a document titled, Read Me First.doc. Michael doesn't know I've compiled this. I pray I'm wrong, but if anything happens to us, this is why. Harrison Construction has been falsifying safety reports for Project Silverline, the new federal courthouse. Michael discovered structural issues during his inspection last month, but when he submitted his report, the version that reached the project managers had been altered. 3 workers have already died in accidents. When Michael questioned his supervisor, Kent Harrison, about the discrepancies, he was told to mind his own business. I've gathered proof from Michael's original reports, compared them to the official versions, and recorded conversations. Kent Harrison, Mayor Phillips, and Judge Mercer are all implicated. They stand to lose millions if the project is delayed or canceled. I fear they might do anything to protect themselves. Norma Allen felt sick. He remembered the Silverline project. It had been the talk of the town. The new courthouse, completed 8 years ago, was now Pineville's pride and joy. Mayor Phillips had been re-elected twice since then, his campaign heavily funded by Harrison Construction. Judge Mercer presided over the district court, and Kent Harrison had become one of the wealthiest men in the county. Next, Alan opened a folder containing audio files. Norma's voice, clear and determined, narrated what she was doing as she photographed documents. Then another recording, Michael arguing with Kent Harrison. These support beams won't hold under stress, Kent. People could die. Your job is to sign off on the inspection, Mike, not redesign the damn building. Do you know how much it would cost to fix this at this stage? We're talking millions. The project would be delayed for months. I don't care. I won't sign off on this. It's not safe. Think of your family, Mike. That nice RV you just bought. The kids' college funds. Don't throw away everything for some hypothetical scenario that might never happen. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Alan's blood ran cold. The final audio file was dated 3 days before the Carwells disappeared. Norma's voice was shaking. Someone followed me from the grocery store today. A black SUV with tinted windows. It parked across the street and stayed there for hours. Michael thinks I'm being paranoid. He says he resolved things with Kent, that we're going on this trip to give everyone time to cool down. But I'm scared. If anything happens to us, look at Kent Harrison. Look at Mayor Phillips. They're behind this. Alan copied the files to an anonymous cloud account he created on the spot, then removed the USB drive. His mind reeled as pieces fell into place. The trip hadn't been planned months in advance, as Michael had told everyone. It had been a hasty decision, perhaps an attempt to escape. But they hadn't made it far. As Alan left the library, the weight of what he'd discovered pressed down on him. He couldn't go to Sheriff Steeney now. But who could he trust? The answer came as he passed the Pineville Gazette's office. Olivia Reeves, the newspaper's investigative reporter, had been a thorn in the local government side for years. She'd gone after Mayor Phillips during his last campaign, questioning his ties to local businesses. If anyone would help expose the truth regardless of who it implicated, it would be her. Alan parked and entered the small office. Olivia sat at her desk, frowning at her computer screen, her dark curls falling around her face. She looked up as the bell above the door jingled. "Alan Beck," she said, recognition lighting her eyes. "I was just reading about your discovery at the lake. Terrible tragedy. What brings you here?" Alan closed the door behind him. "I need your help, and I think you're the only person in town I can trust with this." 20 minutes later, Olivia sat back in her chair, her face pale as she removed her headphones after listening to Norma's recordings. "This is explosive," she said quietly. "You realize what you're accusing these men of? Murder, conspiracy, corruption at the highest levels of our local government." "I'm not accusing anyone," Alan said. "Norma is, and she and her entire family ended up at the bottom of Lake Clearwater." Olivia nodded slowly. "The timing fits. The courthouse project was in its final inspection phase 9 years ago." She tapped her pen against her desk. "But we need more than these files. We need someone who can corroborate Norma's claims. Otherwise, it's just a conspiracy theory from a dead woman." "Pamela Turner could help," Alan said. "But she was taken, probably by the same people who've been keeping her quiet all these years." "Taken? What do you mean?" Alan explained what he'd witnessed outside the diner, describing the black SUV and the man with the badge. Olivia's brow furrowed. "That doesn't sound like a local operation. That sounds federal. Except Pamela specifically warned me about people with connections everywhere. What if they were just posing as federal agents? Or what if they actually were federal agents?" Olivia countered. "Think about it. A federal courthouse built with structural defects. That would interest real federal authorities." Alan hadn't considered that possibility. "So what do we do?" "First, we make copies of everything. Insurance. Then we need to find someone who worked on that courthouse project who might be willing to talk." Olivia turned to her computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. There were dozens of subcontractors. Someone must know something. As Olivia worked, Alan's phone buzzed. "Sheriff Steeney again. Where are you? Need you for formal identification." Olivia glanced at the message. "You should go. Act normal. Meanwhile, I'll start digging. Come back after dark. Fewer eyes watching." Alan nodded, reluctantly standing to leave. "Be careful, Olivia. These people have already killed 4 people. Maybe more." "I've been threatened by powerful men before," she replied, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "I'll lock the doors." As Alan drove to the sheriff's office, a sense of dread settled over him. He was about to look into the faces of his dead friends, all while pretending he hadn't just discovered who might have killed them. Could he maintain his composure? Would Sheriff Steeney see through him? The sheriff's office was buzzing with activity when Alan arrived. Deputies spoke in hushed tones, and forensic personnel hurried between rooms. Sheriff Steeney met him in the lobby, his expression grave. "Thanks for coming, Alan. This won't be easy, but it's necessary." Alan followed him to a small room where 4 photographs were laid out on a table. Not the actual bodies, small mercies, but images clean enough to recognize the faces of his friends. Michael and Norma looked peaceful, almost as if they were sleeping. But the children... Alan turned away, bile rising in his throat. "It's them," he managed to say. "The Carwell family." Sheriff Steeney placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Alan, truly. We're treating this as a homicide investigation now." He hesitated. "Is there anything at all you can tell me that might shed light on why someone would want to harm them?" Alan's mind raced. The photo on his porch. Pamela's warning. The USB drive's damning contents. The sheriff's family connection to Kent Harrison. "No," Alan lied, his mouth dry. "Nothing I can think of." As Sheriff Steeney led him back to the lobby, Alan noticed a tall man in a dark suit speaking with one of the deputies, the same man he'd seen taking Pamela into the black SUV outside the diner. Their eyes met briefly, and Alan quickly looked away, heart pounding. "Who's that?" Alan asked casually as they reached the exit. "FBI," Steeney replied. "They've taken an interest in the case. Strange, isn't it, after all these years?" Alan mumbled his agreement and hurried to his car. As he pulled away from the sheriff's office, he checked his rearview mirror repeatedly, half expecting to see a black SUV following him. Instead, he noticed something else, a small piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper, fluttering in the wind. At the next stoplight, he reached out and grabbed it. The message, in the same neat block lettering as the note with the photograph, sent ice through his veins. "The reporter can't help you now." Alan's tires screeched as he made an illegal U-turn, heart hammering against his ribs. The note's warning echoed in his mind as he sped toward the Pineville Gazette office. The same block letters, the same threatening tone. Whoever had been watching him knew he'd spoken to Olivia. The parking lot was empty when he arrived, the open sign in the window now dark, despite it being hours before closing time. Alan tried the door, locked. He pressed his face against the glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to block the glare. The office appeared undisturbed, but there was no sign of Olivia. He pounded on the door, calling her name. Nothing. With shaking hands, Alan dialed Olivia's cell phone. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. Fighting rising panic, he circled around to the back of the building where a narrow alley separated the newspaper office from a coffee shop next door. The rear door stood slightly ajar, unusual for security-conscious Olivia. "Olivia?" Alan called, pushing the door open wider. "It's Alan. Are you here?" The back office was dark and quiet except for the gentle hum of a computer. Alan felt along the wall for a light switch and flipped it on. The room appeared normal at first glance, desk in order, chairs properly tucked in. But as his eyes adjusted, he noticed scattered papers on the floor near Olivia's desk, as if knocked down in a hurry. Her coffee mug had tipped over, its contents forming a dark stain on a stack of documents. And there, blinking on her computer screen, was an open document, a half-written article with the title, "Corruption and Murder, the Truth Behind the Clearwater Tragedy." Alan stepped closer, scanning the text Olivia had managed to type before she was interrupted. 9 years ago, the Carwell family disappeared without a trace during what was supposed to be a vacation. Their vehicle has now been discovered at the bottom of Lake Clearwater, revealing evidence of foul play. Sources close to the investigation have provided this reporter with documents suggesting Michael Carwell, a safety inspector for Harrison Construction, discovered critical structural flaws in the federal courthouse project days before his disappearance. Evidence indicates that high-ranking local officials, including names redacted pending confirmation, may have been involved in covering up these safety violations, which have potentially put hundreds of lives at risk daily since the courthouse opened 8 years ago. Most disturbing are indications that the Carwell family's disappearance was not random, but the article abruptly ended mid-sentence. Whatever Olivia had been about to write, she hadn't gotten the chance to finish it. Alan's blood ran cold. Olivia wouldn't have left willingly with her coffee spilled and an unfinished article on screen. Someone had taken her, just like Pamela. As if confirming his fears, Alan noticed Olivia's cell phone lying beneath her desk. Its screen cracked as if dropped during a struggle. He picked it up and found it unlocked. The most recent call had been made 30 minutes ago to a number listed simply as J in her contacts. Alan pressed redial before he could think better of it. After 2 rings, a gruff male voice answered. "Olivia, are you okay? You hung up suddenly earlier." "This isn't Olivia," Alan said quickly. "My name is Alan Beck. I think Olivia's in trouble. She was looking into something for me, and now she's missing from her office." A long pause followed. "Where are you now?" "At the Gazette office." "Who is this?" "James McKenna. I'm a special agent with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit." The man's voice was clipped, professional. "Stay where you are. Don't touch anything else. I'm 20 minutes out." The line went dead before Alan could respond. FBI, the same people who'd taken Pamela, or was this a different division entirely? Alan stared at the phone, indecision paralyzing him. If he fled, he'd look guilty of something. If he stayed and this Agent McKenna was part of the conspiracy, he might be walking into a trap. His gaze fell back to Olivia's computer screen and the evidence she'd been compiling. He couldn't leave it behind. Using his sleeve to avoid fingerprints, Alan jiggled the mouse to prevent the screen from locking and quickly searched for any files related to the Carwells. He found a folder labeled Clearwater Case, containing the copies he'd provided plus additional documents. Old newspaper clippings about the courthouse construction, employee records from Harrison Construction, campaign finance reports for Mayor Phillips. Alan spotted a USB port on the front of Olivia's computer. Without giving himself time to reconsider, he took the drive from his pocket and copied everything from Olivia's folder. As the files transferred, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a subfolder labeled Whistleblower. Inside was a single audio file recorded just an hour ago. Alan clicked play, and a disguised voice filled the small office. "Ms. Reeves, I can confirm that Michael Carwell identified critical defects in the support structure of the Silverline Courthouse. I was part of the engineering team. We were ordered to conceal these findings. When Carwell refused to sign off on the inspection, Kent Harrison personally threatened him. I've lived with this guilt for 9 years. The building is unsafe. It could collapse under the right conditions, killing everyone inside. I have original blueprints showing where the compromised supports are located. Meet me at the Riverside Motel, room 12 at midnight. Come alone." The file ended. Alan checked the time, 9:17 p.m. Less than 3 hours until the meeting. This anonymous whistleblower might be their only chance to prove what had happened to the Carwells. The file transfer completed, and Alan pocketed the USB drive. He needed to leave before Agent McKenna arrived. But first, he took a quick photo of the whistleblower information with his phone. Just as he was about to exit through the back door, headlights swept across the alley wall. A vehicle had pulled up outside. Alan ducked behind a filing cabinet, holding his breath as heavy footsteps approached the rear entrance. The back door creaked open wider. A beam of light swept across the room, a flashlight. Then a familiar voice called out, "Olivia, it's Sheriff Steeney. Are you here?" Alan remained perfectly still, barely breathing. What was the sheriff doing here? And how had he known to come to the back entrance instead of the front door? The beam of light moved methodically around the room, passing over the filing cabinet behind which Alan hid. It paused briefly on Olivia's desk, illuminating the spilled coffee and her unfinished article. "Damn it," Steny muttered. He moved to the computer, and Alan heard the clack of keyboard keys. The sheriff was erasing evidence. Suddenly, another set of footsteps entered the building. A second flashlight beam joined the first. "Find anything?" A new voice, one Alan recognized with a jolt as Kent Harrison's. "She was definitely working on a story about the Carwells," Steny replied. "But I don't see any files. She must have them with her." "What about Beck? Any sign of him?" "His car's not outside. We need to find them both before they talk to the feds. The real feds, not our friends." McKenna called. "He's on his way. Said Beck contacted him using the reporter's phone." "Then we don't have much time. Let's go check her apartment." The footsteps retreated and the back door closed. Alan waited several minutes, listening intently for any sound that might indicate they had left someone behind to watch the place. When he was satisfied he was alone, he emerged from his hiding spot, mind racing. Sheriff Steeney and Kent Harrison were working together, just as Pamela had warned. They were looking for him and Olivia. And apparently, there were real feds involved now, which suggested some of the federal agents might be fake or compromised. Alan slipped out the back door into the alley, keeping to the shadows. He needed to get to the Riverside Motel before midnight. The whistleblower might be his only chance to expose the truth, and possibly his only hope of finding Olivia and Pamela alive. As he reached his car parked a block away, an unmarked police cruiser rolled slowly past the Gazette office. Alan ducked down until it had turned the corner, then started his engine and headed in the opposite direction from the motel. He would take the long way around town, avoiding main roads. He couldn't risk being followed, not when lives depended on what he did next. But one question burned in his mind as he drove through the darkening streets of Pineville. If Sheriff Steeney and Kent Harrison were willing to kill an entire family to protect their secret, what else might they do to keep it buried? The Riverside Motel had seen better days. Its neon sign flickered inconsistently, several letters permanently dark, giving it an ominous appearance against the night sky. Located on the outskirts of Pineville, where the town bled into dense forest, it was the kind of place that rented rooms by the week to people who didn't want to be found. Alan parked his car behind an abandoned gas station a quarter-mile down the road and approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. It was 11:42 p.m., early for the midnight meeting, but he needed time to ensure the area wasn't being watched. From the cover of trees bordering the property, he surveyed the scene. The motel was a single-story L-shaped building with about 20 rooms. A rusty pickup truck and 3 sedans were parked in the lot. No black SUVs or police cruisers in sight. Room 12 was located at the far end of the building, partially obscured by a vending machine. As Alan watched, a figure emerged from the room, a man in his 50s with thinning gray hair, wearing a worn flannel shirt and jeans. The whistleblower. The man looked nervous, checking his watch and scanning the parking lot before retreating back inside. Alan was about to approach when movement near the motel office caught his eye. A man in civilian clothes leaned against the wall, smoking a cigarette, his posture too alert for a casual visitor. Something about his stance suggested law enforcement. As if confirming Alan's suspicion, the man touched his ear briefly, the gesture of someone wearing an earpiece. They had the place under surveillance. Alan retreated deeper into the trees, considering his options. He couldn't approach the room directly, not with someone watching, but he couldn't afford to miss this meeting either. The whistleblower might flee if he sensed a trap. The back of the motel faced a steep embankment that dropped down to the river. It was a difficult approach, but it might offer a way to reach room 12 undetected. Alan circled through the woods, making his way down the slope. The sound of rushing water masked his footsteps as he climbed back up toward the rear of the building. Each room had a small window in the back. Some were dark, others glowed with the blue light of television screens. When Alan reached the window of room 12, he saw the gray-haired man pacing nervously, a large envelope clutched in his hands. The man glanced frequently at the door, clearly anticipating Olivia's arrival. Alan tapped gently on the glass. The man startled, dropping the envelope and backing away from the window. "I'm a friend of Olivia Reeves," Alan whispered urgently. "She's in trouble. There's surveillance out front." The man hesitated, then cautiously approached the window. "Who are you?" "Alan Beck. I'm the one who found the Carwell family's RV in the lake. Olivia was helping me investigate." He held up the USB drive. "I have everything she gathered, but she's been taken, just like Pamela Turner." Recognition flashed in the man's eyes at Pamela's name. After a moment's hesitation, he unlatched the window, allowing Alan to awkwardly climb through. "Robert Dawson," the man introduced himself once Alan was inside. "I was senior structural engineer on the courthouse project." "You're the whistleblower." Dawson nodded, picking up the envelope he'd dropped. 9 years too late. Remorse etched deep lines in his face. "I should have spoken up when Michael first raised concerns. Maybe they'd still be alive." "Why now?" Alan asked. Dawson gestured to a newspaper on the bed. The front page showed the recovery operation at Lake Clearwater. "When I saw this, I knew the truth would eventually come out, and I can't live with it anymore." He opened the envelope and spread its contents on the bed. "These are the original blueprints and my personal inspection notes." They proved the courthouse was built with substandard materials and inadequate support structures. Alan examined the documents, though the technical specifications meant little to him. What exactly did Michael discover? The foundation and main support columns were compromised. Kent Harrison substituted cheaper materials than what was specified. The steel reinforcements are inadequate. Under certain conditions, a heavy snow load on the roof, or God forbid, a minor earthquake, the entire structure could collapse. Dawson's hands trembled. Hundreds of people work in that building every day. And this is what got the Carwells killed? Dawson nodded grimly. Michael refused to falsify his inspection report. He was going to file it with the Federal Oversight Committee. If he had, the project would have been halted, the contractors investigated. Harrison, Mayor Phillips, Judge Mercer, they all would have faced criminal charges. Instead, they murdered Michael and his entire family. I believe so. Dawson looked away, guilt evident in his expression. After they disappeared, Kent promoted me to Michael's position. Told me directly that unless I wanted to go on vacation like Carwell, I'd sign off on the inspection. I was a coward. I had a family too. Alan felt a mix of anger and compassion. How many people had been silenced by fear over the years? We need to get these documents to the authorities, Alan said. The real authorities, not local law enforcement. Dawson nodded. I made copies. The originals are in a safety deposit box. Insurance, in case something happens to me. A smart precaution, Alan thought. He was about to suggest they leave when headlights swept across the motel room curtains. A vehicle had pulled into the parking lot. Both men froze. Expecting anyone else? Alan whispered. Dawson shook his head, gathering the documents and stuffing them back in the envelope. We need to go, now. They moved toward the window, but before they could open it, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Mr. Dawson? FBI. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Alan and Dawson exchanged panicked glances. Were these the real feds, or the ones working with Harrison? There's another way out, Dawson whispered, moving to the bathroom. He pointed to a narrow window above the toilet. It'll be tight, but we can make it. The knocking became more insistent. Mr. Dawson, open the door, or we'll be forced to enter. Alan followed Dawson into the bathroom, helping him push the small window open. Dawson shoved the envelope of documents into Alan's hands. You go first, Dawson insisted. Get these to someone you trust. Just as Alan prepared to climb through the tiny opening, they heard the distinctive sound of a key card in the door lock. Management override. Seconds later, the motel room door burst open. Go! Dawson hissed, boosting Alan up toward the window. Alan scrambled through the opening, scraping his shoulders on the frame. As he tumbled onto the ground outside, he heard shouting from within the room, followed by a sudden, sharp sound that could only be a gunshot. Terror surged through him as he sprinted toward the embankment, envelope clutched tightly to his chest. More shouts echoed behind him, but he didn't stop to look back, sliding down the slope toward the river in a controlled fall, branches whipping at his face and arms. When he reached the bottom, he paused behind a large boulder, struggling to catch his breath. Above him, flashlight beams swept the hillside. They were coming after him. With no time to rest, Alan splashed into the shallow edge of the river, moving downstream where the current was stronger and the water deeper. He held the envelope high, trying to keep the precious documents dry as he waded further in. When the water reached his chest, he made a decision. Taking a deep breath, he submerged himself completely, letting the current carry him away from the searching flashlights. The cold water shocked his system, but desperation pushed him forward. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, Alan dragged himself onto the opposite bank, soaking wet but alive. The envelope was damp but intact, the documents inside protected by plastic sleeves. In the distance, he could hear sirens approaching the motel. Had they killed Dawson, just as they'd killed the Carwells? The thought sickened him. How many more people would die to protect this secret? Alan needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere he could examine the documents properly and figure out his next move. But where? His house wasn't safe. The police station was definitely out. Cynthia was staying at their daughter's place 2 towns over after he'd insisted she leave Pineville temporarily. As he stumbled through the dark woods, a realization hit him. There was one place in Pineville that might still be safe because no one would expect him to go there, the Carwell house. The current owners were away on vacation. He'd overheard them mentioning it to a neighbor last week. It was risky, but he didn't see any better options. An hour later, soaking wet and exhausted, Alan picked the lock on the Carwells' old garden shed and slipped inside. The new owners had remodeled the house, but had left the shed largely untouched. As he huddled in the dark, surrounded by garden tools and forgotten toys that might have once belonged to Donna and Jake, Alan spread out Dawson's documents with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The technical blueprints confirmed everything Dawson had said about the courthouse's structural deficiencies. But there was something else in the envelope, something that made Alan's blood run cold. A faded photograph of Kent Harrison, Sheriff Steeney, Mayor Phillips, and Judge Mercer standing together at what appeared to be a hunting lodge. They were all smiling, glasses raised in a toast, and in the background, partially visible through a doorway, was a framed certificate on the wall, an award presented to the Silverline Brotherhood by the East Lakes Masonic Lodge. Scrawled on the back of the photo in what was clearly Dawson's handwriting, "The real power in Pineville." They call themselves the Silverline Brotherhood. They're not just business partners, they're a secret society, and they're willing to kill to protect their interests. Dawn broke over Pineville, pale light filtering through the dusty windows of the Carwells' garden shed. Alan hadn't slept. His clothes had dried uncomfortably on his body, and his mind raced with everything he'd discovered. A secret society controlling the town. The Carwell family murdered to protect not just a corrupt construction project, but the reputation and power of the Silverline Brotherhood. He needed help, but who could he trust in a town where the sheriff, the mayor, and a federal judge were all compromised? The answer came to him as he stared at the photo of the 4 men. There was one person who might help, someone who had known Michael Carwell well and had nothing to gain from his death. Michael's former assistant, Kathy McCarthy. Kathy had left Harrison Construction shortly after Michael's disappearance, devastated by the loss of her mentor. Last Alan had heard, she was working for an environmental engineering firm in the neighboring town. If anyone might know more about what Michael had discovered and be willing to help expose the truth, it would be Kathy. Using his phone's weakening battery, Alan searched for her contact information. Finding her address, he waited until 7 a.m. before making his move. He needed to avoid being seen in daylight, but he also couldn't stay in the shed much longer. Sooner or later, someone would notice the broken lock. Keeping to back streets and cutting through yards, Alan made his way to his car, still hidden behind the abandoned gas station. No police vehicles were in sight, but a sense of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. He drove carefully, obeying all traffic laws, taking an indirect route to the next town. Kathy's home was a modest apartment above a flower shop in a quiet neighborhood. Alan parked a block away and approached on foot, constantly checking for any signs of surveillance. When Kathy answered his knock, her initial confusion quickly turned to concern. "Alan Beck? What happened to you? You look terrible." "I need your help, Kathy. It's about Michael Carwell." Her expression darkened, but she stepped aside to let him in. Once inside, Alan laid out everything: the RV in the lake, Pamela Turner's revelations, Olivia's disappearance, Robert Dawson's evidence, and finally, the photograph of the Silverline Brotherhood. Kathy listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each new detail. When he finished, she sat in silence for a moment, then rose and went to a bookshelf. From behind a row of engineering textbooks, she removed a small fireproof box. "Michael gave me this the day before he left," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Told me to keep it safe, not to open it unless something happened to him. I was going to give it to the police when they first disappeared, but then—" She trailed off. "But then what?" Alan prompted. "Sheriff Steeney came to see me personally, said they were following leads that Michael had embezzled company funds and fled with his family. Asked if he'd given me anything before he left." The way he asked, It wasn't normal. Something in his eyes scared me. She unlocked the box. So I lied, said Michael hadn't given me anything. Inside the box was a USB drive similar to the one Pamela had provided, along with a sealed envelope. Kathy handed both to Alan. I never had the courage to look at these. After a while, I convinced myself it was better not to know. Alan connected the USB drive to Kathy's laptop. It contained videos. Michael had secretly recorded meetings with Kent Harrison and the others. In one particularly damning clip, Michael confronted the four men about the courthouse's structural problems, and Mayor Phillips explicitly threatened him. Think carefully about what you're doing, Carwell. The people in this room control everything in this town. Jobs, police, courts. If you file that report, we can't protect your family. Accidents happen all the time on these mountain roads. The envelope contained a handwritten letter from Michael to Norma, dated the day before they disappeared. Norma, if you're reading this, something's happened to me. I've discovered the Harrison construction corruption goes deeper than we thought. It's not just about cutting corners on the courthouse. The Brotherhood has been laundering money through construction projects for years, paying off officials, eliminating anyone who threatens them. I've gathered enough evidence to take them down, but it's too dangerous to go to local authorities. We need to get out of town. Contact the federal prosecutor in Denver directly. I've made arrangements. We leave tomorrow morning. Tell no one. I love you. Michael, they never made it to Denver, Alan said quietly. They barely made it out of town. Kathy's eyes filled with tears. Michael was the most ethical person I knew. He wouldn't look the other way no matter what they threatened him with. And they killed him for it. Him and his entire family. Alan's voice hardened with resolve. We need to finish what he started. How? If what you've told me is true, they've already killed Dawson and possibly kidnapped 2 women. The local authorities are compromised, and we don't know which federal agents to trust. Alan considered their options. We need to make this too big for them to contain. We need to expose everything at once, so publicly that they can't silence everyone involved. A plan began to form in his mind. The courthouse dedication ceremony. The 10th anniversary is next week. Mayor Phillips, Judge Mercer, all the big names in town will be there. It's their symbol of power, the perfect place to expose their crimes. Working through the day, Alan and Kathy consolidated all the evidence. Michael's recordings, Norma's documentation, Dawson's blueprints, the whistleblower testimonies. They created multiple copies, encrypted some, and left others unprotected, ready to be distributed. What about Olivia and Pamela? Kathy asked. We need to find them. Alan had been thinking about that too. If the Brotherhood is as powerful as we believe, they wouldn't risk keeping prisoners in town. But they would want them somewhere secure, somewhere they control. He studied the hunting lodge photo again. This place, if we could identify it. Kathy examined the photo closer. Wait, I recognize this. It's the old Mercer family hunting lodge. It's about 20 miles outside town, up in the mountains. Michael mentioned it once, said the Brotherhood held their initiation ceremonies there. As darkness fell, they finalized their plan. Kathy would take copies of the evidence to a trusted friend at the Denver FBI field office, bypassing local law enforcement entirely. Alan would search the hunting lodge for Olivia and Pamela. Be careful, Kathy warned as they parted. These men have killed to protect their secret. They won't hesitate to do it again. Under the cover of night, Alan drove the winding mountain roads toward the Mercer Lodge. The property was secluded, accessible only by a private road that branched off from the main highway. He parked a mile away and hiked through the dense forest, approaching from the rear where security would likely be lighter. The lodge was an imposing 2-story log structure with a wraparound porch. 2 black SUVs were parked outside, the same type Alan had seen taking Pamela. Light glowed from several windows, and Alan caught glimpses of movement inside. Someone was home. Circling the perimeter, Alan found what he was looking for, a cellar entrance, partially concealed by overgrown shrubs. The heavy padlock on the doors yielded to the bolt cutters he'd brought. Silently, he descended into darkness. The cellar was cool and damp, smelling of earth and old wood. Alan's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing wine racks and storage shelves. At first he thought he'd made a mistake. There was no sign anyone had been held here. But then he heard it, a muffled sound from behind a shelving unit. Alan pushed against the shelf, discovering it concealed a hidden room. Inside, bound to chairs but very much alive, were Olivia and Pamela. Their eyes widened at the sight of him. "Told you he'd figure it out," Olivia whispered hoarsely to Pamela as Alan removed their gags and worked on their restraints. "They're upstairs," Pamela warned. "All of them, planning how to contain the situation." "We don't have much time," Alan said. "Can you walk?" Both women nodded. As they crept up the cellar stairs and into the night, Alan could hear raised voices from inside the lodge, the Brotherhood arguing about what to do next. They had almost reached the tree line when a shout erupted behind them. Sheriff Stenny stood on the porch, gun raised. "Stop right there, Beck!" Alan pushed the women ahead. "Run! Get to the car!" As they disappeared into the trees, Alan turned to face Stenny. Other figures emerged from the lodge: Kent Harrison, Mayor Phillips, Judge Mercer. The Silver Line Brotherhood finally exposed. "It's over, Steeny," Alan called. "Everything, the corruption, the murders, all of it, is already on its way to the Denver FBI field office. The real FBI, not your compromised friends." Sheriff Steeny's face twisted with rage. "You think this ends with us? The Brotherhood has branches in every major city. We're just one chapter." "Maybe," Alan acknowledged. "But your chapter ends tonight." As if on cue, the night exploded with light and sound. Police helicopters, sirens, agents in tactical gear swarming the property from all directions. Kathy's friend in Denver had come through with more than just an evidence handoff. The FBI had launched a full raid on the Brotherhood. In the chaos that followed, Alan managed to slip away, finding Olivia and Pamela waiting by his car. Together, they watched as the men who had terrorized Pineville for decades were led away in handcuffs. 1 week later, Alan stood with Cynthia at Lake Clearwater's edge as the Carwell's RV was finally raised from the depths. A proper funeral would follow, giving the family the dignity in death they had been denied for 9 years. The courthouse had been evacuated pending a complete structural assessment, and arrests continued as the Brotherhood's web of corruption unraveled. "Michael would be proud," Cynthia said softly, taking Alan's hand. "You finished what he started." Alan thought of his friend, his integrity, his courage, his refusal to look away from wrongdoing even when it would have been easier to do so. Michael Carwell had died trying to protect others from a danger they couldn't see. In the end, the truth had risen from the depths, like the RV itself. Waterlogged and damaged, but finally, undeniably visible to all. "The kids asked if they could come back for the funeral," Cynthia continued. "I told them yes. I think it's important for them to be here, to understand what really happened." Alan nodded, watching as workers carefully secured the RV to a flatbed truck. Its windows were clouded with years of sediment, the once cheerful paint now a ghostly grey-green. But it had preserved the evidence that brought down the Brotherhood, just as Michael had preserved the evidence that would eventually expose their crimes. Some truths, Alan reflected, couldn't stay submerged forever. They waited patiently in the dark, rising when the time was right, breaking the surface with the power to change everything. "Let's go home," he said finally. "We have a lot of healing to do." As they turned to leave, Alan cast one last glance at the lake. For 9 years it had kept its secret, holding the Carwell family in its cold embrace. Now that embrace was broken, the family reclaimed, their story told. And somewhere, he hoped, Michael, Norma, Donna, and Jake Carwell had finally found peace. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story hit deep, and I hope it made you feel something. Some truths can't stay buried forever. If it moved you, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the